Good afternoon, welcome to Money Tips. Well, as the job furlough scheme or the job retention scheme starts to wind down and will eventually end, a survey has found that up to 20% of UK employers are planning to cut jobs. That means make redundancies, let staff go, fire them, whatever you want to call it. They're planning to cut staff. This is in response to lower subsidies from government to retain jobs. This is from the British Chamber of Commerce, which has surveyed hundreds of employers. And as you may have already read in the news, that from the 1st of August, that's yesterday, payments towards salaries are cut now to 60% of contributions, with employers paying 20% into it. And this is for people who are on furlough or their jobs are on hold at the moment, and they're paid money to stay at home. Now, based on recent figures, nearly 2 million workers were still on this furlough, even though we see the economy getting back and moving again and things opening up. Still, there are 2 million workers on this furlough or job retention scheme. But at the peak of this scheme, there were 5.1 million people on this job, all supported by, well, they say the government, but it's by the taxpayer at the end of the day. The government doesn't have the money. They just find that money by raising taxes. Well, at the moment, they're finding it by printing money and creating money out of thin air. But that's got to be paid back somewhere along the line to avoid, the country going into default. But we're not some banana republic that just defaults on debts. We've got to repay that. Otherwise, the country's reputation is finished. So we've got to pay that back. And that's going to come from our taxes, our children's taxes, and our grandchildren's taxes eventually. Don't forget that the debt incurred in World War II was not fully repaid until the 80s. So years later, and the country suffered from that. We saw a post-war decline in investment. We saw a post-war decline in lots of different things that kind of led right up to the 60s and 70s. We saw things gradually going down. So the government has said now that 11 million jobs have been supported by this job retention scheme, which was launched as far back as April 2020. Now, obviously, there's a need for this, I suppose, when you think that millions of workers could have been laid off and would probably then have had to go onto some sort of state benefits anyway. So why not sort of keep them in work or keep the jobs going? But I think it's gone on too long. I think some employers have certainly taken advantage of this scheme. And, I'm personally pleased that the scheme will close at the end of September. And this means that firms that can no longer, are no longer viable and can no longer actually pay their way should really not be dependent on government and state handouts to keep things going. And, as I said, the scheme was meant to, originally it was guaranteeing up to 80% of salaries for jobs that are on hold. So if you had a firm and your business had closed because of the lockdown, enforced lockdown, I guess then you could say, right, well, I'm laying these workers off, they'll stay at home and the government will pay 80% of the salary. But I think a lot of this was abused and there were people at home but really working, and the employer was saying, well, look, you stay at home, we'll get you on furlough, just we'll do a bit of work, we'll send you a bit of work online. So I think originally a lot of firms have abused this, and a lot of large firms have taken advantage of the government's generosity with our money. But it's now starting to wind down. From the 1st of July, employers had to contribute 10% more. Now it's 20% more, and then in September it's going to close. So the Chamber of Commerce surveyed 250 businesses. 18% said they were likely to make staff redundant now. So we could see mass redundancies. I mean, if 2 million people are on this scheme now, nearly 2 million people, and 20% of those people are laid off, that's like 400,000 jobs could go this autumn. Now, in addition to that, I think that the government have missed out on a lot of tourist industry people and visitors this summer. I've been in town recently and noticed that most of the tourists are British people, and I went to 2 major tourist attractions, one in the centre of London, and I thought I could listen to the voices and I could hear mostly people from other parts of the UK visiting London, taking advantage of maybe cheap rates and that sort of thing, and just somewhere to go. other than going through all the hassle of going abroad and paying £500 or £600 to get tests and all the additional paperwork involved in going abroad, and the risk that you could go abroad and then the government changes the rules whilst you're abroad, as it's happened several times. And so I think we've missed out on that. The airlines are certainly suffering. Airports are suffering. Because airports are retail businesses at the end of the day. And if they're not getting foot flow through there, all the shops are suffering there. And as I said, I've noticed that there are a lot less foreign tourists in the country. And one guy told me that normally all of the people he was taking on a walking tour would be, Americans, Asians, whatever. And now it was... That day, it was all British people on that tour. And he said numbers are down, substantially. They're barely holding on. But think of the restaurants, the hotels, the bars and the retail shops are all suffering because of less tourists coming into the UK, which is worth several £billion to the UK economy. It's worth a lot of money. You think of places like Oxford Street, London's famous shopping street, that mile of prime retail space. 50% of their businesses comes from overseas visitors, and they rely on this summer season to boost them and keep them going through the winter. So and travel industry experts blame the government for taking too long to allow people to come here who've been vaccinated without having to go through tests, whereas other European countries have already changed their rules to allow. So Americans now from this week have been allowed to come in if they've been vaccinated without going through more tests, negative tests, and quarantine, of course. But this is too late for the tourist industry. So experts have said that Americans are already booking tours in Italy, in Venice and Paris, but are leaving out the UK. So we're going to lose a lot of money from that. And I see a lot of jobs going in the hospitality industry. I know on one hand they're saying, well, there's a shortage of staff, but we're now midsummer, and we're missing out on that summer season, and then it goes into autumn and winter. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. So are we going to see a lot of unemployment, or will those jobs be soaked up in other areas? We shall have to see. How will this affect the property market? Well, I think in terms of people buying properties, a lot of people have bought properties this year already, and things may slow down after the end of the stamp duty holiday. But we can definitely see a two-tier kind of economy emerging. We are seeing that there are people who have benefited from the pandemic and the lockdown. A lot of people have been able to keep their jobs, work from home, save thousands of pounds on travel costs, and they've done quite well. Their savings have gone up, in fact. But then there are a lot of people who suffered and been laid off, and perhaps the people in the gig economy have not earned any money at all. The self-employed have suffered, and I've certainly seen a lot of people lose their homes during the pandemic, whereas others have been able to just buy homes. So maybe the property market will continue based on the people that can afford to buy, and that is not everybody. A lot of people can't afford to buy a property anyway. If you're in a minimum wage or a job where you're earning £15,000-20,000 a year, the chances are you can't afford to buy a property unless you live in a really cheap area of the country, up north or whatever parts of Wales, where you can buy properties for £50,000, £60,000, £70,000. But if you're in London and the southeast, where most of the jobs are, and even in big cities, in Birmingham and Manchester, then the chances are, if you're earning 15,000, 20,000, you're not going to qualify for a mortgage, and unless your parents are going to give you a lot of cash to put down. So whether that will affect that side of the market will have to be, we'll have to see what happens with that. But it could affect the rental market. If people are working away from their parental home and they're renting a property, they lose their job, they may have to sort of give up that property and go back home to live with mum and dad or stay with friends. So it could affect the rental. And we know that in London, the amount of tenants has been down. In London, prices of flats and that sort of thing have gone down in London as people have moved out into the suburbs for more space. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with the property market. Personally, I think the property market will slow down anyway, because of the sheer activity that's gone on in the first 6 months of this year, where people were rushing to beat the stamp duty holiday, even if it meant paying more for the property. But now it's bound to slow down because if you were going to buy a property in 2020, 21, a lot of people have done so already, and that's what agents are telling me. So we will have to see whether that will affect property prices. The main thing with property is to know what you're doing. If you want to find out more about investing, property, managing your money, then check out my free training. I'll put a link up to it here, because there's always opportunities. And there's opportunities when prices go up, there's opportunities when prices go down, there's still opportunities when prices remain flat, provided you know what you're doing, you buy right, you buy at the right price, you buy at the right time, which doesn't mean time in the market, but it just means getting the value at the time you buy. And that applies to the stock market, and it applies also to shares and most investments. It's about buying right at the time, not buying now and saying, well, I hope that in the next 20 years this will go up and eventually become a good investment. No, it should be a good investment now. So if you'd like to learn more about how to invest and manage your money, maybe you're interested in getting into property, becoming a property investor, or just becoming financially free without working harder and spending your life all the time exchanging time for money. There are lots of ways of making money on the side. There are lots of ways of becoming self-employed without needing a lot of money. And there are plenty of ways to make your money work harder for you rather than just you working hard for your money all of your life, as most people do. We're entering a difficult phase in the next few years. We're seeing a pensions time bomb where a lot of people will not be able to afford to retire. So if you're nearing retirement and you feel that you may not have enough money to retire, that's the time to look for alternatives. What are you going to do about it? It's no good waiting until the time comes and saying, well, I hope the government will look after me, because the government won't have the money that they've had in the past to look after people from, as the saying goes, from cradle to grave when they launched the welfare state in the UK. So do look at that on-demand training. It's a short video on-demand training you can look at immediately. And as a thank you, I'll give you a special gift at the end of watching that training, which can help transform your finances once you attend that online training. It's absolutely free. So do check that out. Have a look at the link below. Thanks for listening today, and I will speak to you again soon. This is Charles Kelly bringing you money tips to help you save, earn, invest, accumulate, and enjoy more money.